What am I mad about? I'm mad. TCU Horned Frogs, 13.5-point dogs. Come on, man.
Welcome into the first ever episode of College Football Today, a truly historical day here at 24/7 Sports as we get ready to discuss a historical day in college football. I'm Grace Remington with Coach Carl Reed in studio and Bud Elliott joining us live. Now, Carl, we heard you in the open there. You're a pretty mellow guy. Yeah. Why are you so mad today?
Have people watched TCU play football this year?
Apparently
One of the
not.
great teams this year in college football, playing for a national championship. Thrilling game against the University of Michigan. In addition to that, Georgia has had its struggles. Barely got out of there alive against Ohio State. Close calls against the University of Missouri in conference play. Looked very lethargic against Kent State. Georgia has a great team, but it's not the same team that they had a year ago that was one of the most dominant groups of all times. TCU should not be that big of an underdog with the betting plays.
Time and time again, TCU has won close game after close game, 7 comeback wins, tied for second most in the nation, but still not getting the respect they deserve. But you're the betting expert there. Your record is something crazy. Anyone who's been tailing you this season is making a nice profit there. So let's talk about this pick a little bit. Opened at 13.5, has bounced around 12.5. Right now it's back at the opening number. But we know TCU has been a darling at the betting window, going 10-3-1 against the spread. What do you think about this point spread here, and who you taking?
I'm super happy to be on College Football Today. And, you know, I understand the line, right? I played a little bit of Georgia -7 for the first half. I think 13.5, if you just go by power rating, is appropriate. And I'm somebody like Carl. I've loved TCU all year. I mean, we were on Cover 3 podcast, the TCU 28-1 to win the Big 12 crew, and that almost got home. Obviously, Kansas State clipped him in the end. You have a super veteran quarterback in Max Duggan. You have a lot of really good college players. But I'm here in Charlotte, North Carolina, talking to all the coaches at the AFCA convention, and most of them seem to think that Georgia is going to handle TCU easily. And kind of the vibe I get from them is, like, TCU's a good college team. Georgia's got a different level of athlete on its team, and we'll see if they're right. I kind of agree, but at the same time, TCU kind of has some magic this year, and it's been close. If they beat Georgia, it almost certainly would be a close game as well.
But I got a question for you, though. Out of all of those college coaches that are telling you that TCU is a good college team and Georgia's going to handle them, how many of those guys handled TCU when they played them this year? Because TCU's playing for the national championship tonight.
No doubt about it. Look, TCU, there is a historical amount of luck that they've had this year, and they've also earned a whole lot of respect, I think, within the coaching community. As far as guys I talked to who played them, guys on 2 different staffs who lost to them, right? And they have a lot of close games. And typically when you're making your power ratings, right, if you're Vegas and you're setting these opening numbers, you do care that they won. But also, like, you'll give teams credit if they lose, if they play well. And TCU has won a lot of really close coin flip games in which the opponent quarterback was knocked out or in which he didn't play at all. And so I think that does factor in to the power number here. So I get it. Can TCU block Georgia? I think that's going to be huge. TCU has to hold up with its offensive tackles enough without giving them extra help so they can handle Jalen Carter inside, probably with a lot of double teams. Like, that's where I'm looking early in this game, Carl.
When I look at the matchup, I think that Tennessee is a game that you look at because they play a similar style as TCU. But Georgia has an advantage because they are great in the secondary, and Tennessee was very one-dimensional, not very good in the run game. TCU has proven to be dynamic, running the football, and I think that can be an equalizer, and that's going to be one of the keys to the game, and that's going to allow them to be able to use the entire width and distance of the field. I'm looking for a great game out of TCU tonight.
You
mentioned that Georgia. Sorry.
Go ahead, Bud. Go ahead.
No. You mentioned that Georgia secondary, and Keely Ringo is somebody who's a very polarizing player. Some people think he's going to be the top corner in the draft. Other people think maybe not quite as good. But I'm really looking forward to him versus Quentin Johnston of TCU, who I think is the consensus #1 receiver in this upcoming draft. They're both like big, long, linear guys with good long speed. Maybe not the best stop-start out of both these guys, but like athletically, they're kind of similar type players. And so I'm really interested to see how much help does Georgia give Kelee Ringo in this ballgame. Ringo has one of the highest non-helps, like getting no help from the safeties, playing one-on-one percentages in the country. Will Georgia trust Ringo enough to hold up against Johnson, or do they feel like they need to give him some help? And if so, do guys like Lassiter have to step up for them against Darius Davis?
Well, I think that they definitely have to give him an opportunity to guard him. But while that matchup is very intriguing for people, we're not sure that those guys are going to be lined up against each other one-on-one for the entire game. We don't know how Kirby Smart is going to come out and want to defend the guys at TCU. Ringo is a big-time talent, though, at corner, and I wouldn't be surprised if he is the first corner taken in the draft a year from now.
Well,
Carl,
guys,
you coached for a long time. What do you see in TCU's 3-3-5 that made it so difficult for Michigan to ID who they had to block? Like, it wasn't like TCU totally whipped them physically. They held their own, but I felt like Michigan, offensive line-wise, was confused and couldn't get to the second level. What did you see when you watched that game that makes that 3-3 stack so tough?
I think that the movement of their rover safeties and the way that they utilized them, both defending the pass and filling up and run fits in the C and the D gaps, put them in a really great situation, and it was a struggle for J.J. McCarthy in Michigan to figure out where those guys were coming from. They had great movement from those safeties, and that was the difference in the game for them defensively.
and we know that 12 personnel is something that can combat that 3-3-5 defense. At least it's supposed to. It didn't work out great for Michigan, but maybe Georgia took some tips from that. But before we go a little bit deeper into the X's and O's, let's just talk about the path to the playoffs, to the title game, how both teams got here, because it could not be more opposite for Georgia and TCU. Obviously, the Bulldogs were supposed to be here. They're the defending champs. They're trying to go back-to-back and become the first team to repeat in school history and the college football playoff era. Then you have TCU, really the first true Cinderella team to play in the national championship game. And if you're watching by now, you've probably heard all these stats. TCU unranked to start the season, picked to finish seventh in the Big 12 with 200-1 odds to win the ship, and coming off a 5-7 season with a coaching change. So Carl, start us off here, but how the heck did we get here?
Well, I think when you talk about Georgia, Georgia is the undisputed champs. Everybody expected them to be here. An army of 4-star recruits, 5-star recruits, big-time prospects, big-time coaching. Georgia is the new dynasty that everybody thinks is forming, in the same image that Alabama program was for a long time. So Georgia's here, and it's their time. Everybody expected them to be here. TCU, coming off a 5-7 season, nobody thought that TCU would be in this game. Nobody thought that TCU would have this opportunity. What did Sonny Dykes do? Number one, he identified the guys that he needed in the transfer portal. 5 new additions to the defensive side of the football in the way of the transfer portal. Veteran group on offense. 14 starters on TCU are from the state of Texas. So they're also doing the best job in developing kids from the state of Texas. And when you add the additions to the transfer portal, it's been a great recipe for Sonny Dykes. He knows how to build a program, and he's proven that to everybody by being in the national championship game.
Carl, he also hired really good coordinators. I mean, one of the reasons why I was on that TCU 28-1 in the preseason to win the Big 12, not to win the national title. I'm not going to claim I thought they were going to be here. I did not. I thought they had a shot to win the Big 12, and they certainly played for it. One of the reasons I liked it so much was the hire of both coordinators. So he got Garrett Riley, Lincoln's little brother, and he got Joe Gillespie. And when you watch Joe Gillespie's defense, like we just talked about in the last segment, that 3-3-5 stack that he runs with some of his own variations on it, when he was at Tulsa, all the coaches that I know that coached in the American against him were like, thank God Joe Gillespie is out of the American Conference, because that guy can really coach and confuse you. Dykes is a good motivator. Guys like working for him. And Gary Patterson, you mentioned all these dudes from Texas who can really run, and they have a lot of good team speed. Patterson was always a coach in recruiting. The former TCU coach, obviously, built that program up, got him to the FBS, got him into a Power 5 league, from all those great years when they were in the Mountain West. Patterson was always a guy that emphasized traits in recruiting. even if it meant he had to develop them long term. And like maybe you had some guys tune him out in recent years. Certainly, I don't think they played maybe quite as hard for him as they had in prior years. But Sonny took over a roster, I thought, that had a lot of physical talent on it. If he could just bring them all together and get them to play more as a team, and certainly he's done that. So I love the assistant coaching hires, and they had some available talent there. As Carl noted, they added to it with the transfer portal beautifully.
Well, you both hit on it from a general point. Teams are building their rosters differently now through the transfer portal. You said almost half of the starting defense was built through the portal. Sonny Dykes would not have been able to put this 3-3-5 defense together in his first year after 2 decades of Gary Patterson's 4-man front without the transfer portal. So, Bud, I was really excited to hear you were joining the show today because you are the expert on blue chip ratio. Now we see that theory being challenged in this day and age. If TCU wins the Natty, it would be the first team in the playoff era to not have a blue chip ratio over 50%. And for those listening who don't know, that's your 4-star and your 5-star players on the roster. So I just want to go down the numbers for the 4 teams in the playoff. Georgia has 68 blue chippers. Ohio State has 66. Michigan had 44. TCU, 17 blue chippers. That's 23% of the roster about there. So huge contrast here. But are we about to see this theory being challenged around college football?
I think we could be. I mean, look, TCU, as we noted in the open, had a lot of good fortune to get here and also a lot of really good play. It took both things for them to get here. We've seen this challenged a couple times, and the more talented team has always won out when it's been challenged. Most recently, Oregon, when they had Marcus Mariota, came close, and then Ohio State kind of stomped them, right? And then Clemson, the first time, it took a very gutsy onside kick by Nick Saban to defeat them in the round 1 of Clemson-Bama. TCU certainly could do it. And in the annual article that I write, I just say, look, this won't last forever. Somebody will have the right combination of good veteran talent, enough, influx of talent from outside. Maybe the transfer portal can help you some with that. Maybe get a little break or two along the way, and they'll beat it. Like, we will have a Cinderella story in college football. We may be seeing the Cinderella story play out before our own eyes right here. Can they do it? I don't know. Maybe. I kind of think Georgia rolls, but this is certainly something I think other coaches are going to look at and say, hey, a couple extra transfers could help us get over the hump if we still build most of our team. I think probably still has to come through the high school level if you want to play and win the national title on an annual basis.
In the transfer portal era, though, you can make a run like this if you're a group of 5 team because you have the ability to get it right. Because when guys go in the transfer portal, they're looking to play immediately. They're looking to go into systems that they can compete with right away. When you look at 5-star and 4-star kids, and we talked about this earlier in staff meetings today, a lot of those guys end up in the portal because they picked the wrong school from the beginning because they're not paying attention to the fit of the system that they're going into. Guys are going to play in 3-4s, but they need to be playing in 4-3s. Guys are picking offenses where they're only going to use tight ends when those guys want to be wide receivers, and they're picking it for all kind of different reasons. When you come out of the portal, you have the knowledge of experience, and coaches are able to get it right the second time. It allows you to be able to flip your roster. Also, programs like TCU, they recruit guys with specific skill sets, guys that are under the radar recruits, 2-star, 3-star guys. They are getting recruited because they have a trait. They can do 1 or 2 things extremely well, and so they fit perfectly into the system they're going to play into. 4- and 5-star recruits think that no matter where they go, wherever they had the best time and they had the most enjoyment on their trips, they think they can go in and they can play in any system, and a lot of them cannot, and that ends up burning them, and they're looking for a second home very quickly.
I love that you explained that, Carl, because I hesitate to use the phrase this way, but it almost levels the playing field with the Alabamas, the Georgias, the Ohio States of the world, because you see what happens when their star player gets injured and leaves the game. It completely derails the game plan, whereas a team like TCU has a stockpile of talent that is developed for the specific role that they were recruited for. But let's go back to the present moment today. The way both teams have prepared for this championship week is also as different as the ways these rosters have been built. You look at TCU, they're all smiles. They had a DJ at some point during the week. They're taking pictures everywhere they go. Georgia, stiff all business. So considering everything we just discussed, the historical context, the roster building, Bud, start us off. Is the pressure real for both of these teams tonight?
I think there's certainly some pressure on Georgia because it is seen as, I don't want to call it a layup opportunity, but like everybody in the country says this is a game that Georgia should win. And if they do, they're going to be one of the rare teams in the last 50 years to go back-to-back, and they will set themselves up because they're going to be the national championship favorite for next year. They will set themselves up to be the first team in more than 50 years to ever win back-to-back-to-back national championships. You know, for TCU, as you guys said, nobody expected them to be here. And I'm not saying that they're just happy to be there. They shouldn't just be happy to be there. They should try to win the whole thing, and I think they will, try. But you got to stay true to your identity, right? Nobody thinks Kirby's a guy that's going to be playing music, before the ball game. And Sonny Dykes is pretty loose, and you don't want to change up your approach when you get to the title game. Dance with what brung you. Do what got you there. I think you're doing the right thing.
Everybody talks about how much pressure is on Georgia, how much pressure is on Kirby Smart. It's a layup opportunity. TCU is not this strong. But let me tell you something. It's pressure on Sonny Dykes. He's got TCU tonight playing for the national championship. It don't get no bigger than that, bud. It doesn't get any bigger than that stage. And the best time to win a championship is when you can win it. And he has the opportunity tonight. He may never get an opportunity to coach in another national championship game. So don't think that he has no pressure on him. The entire state of Texas is watching. The world is watching. And like the great Ricky Bobby said, if you ain't first, you're last. TCU wants the championship tonight, and they're going to go give it all they got. It's a lot of pressure over there on TCU's sideline to get it done tonight.
What is TCU's path to victory here?
Well, number one, they can't turn the ball over. Max Duggan has to take care of the football. You cannot give a team like Georgia second and third and fourth opportunity. So the number one thing you need to do is take care of the ball. Number two, you need to make plays in the passing game. They need to show that they complete passes. And when they clear that box out, their running backs need to attack the line of scrimmage, and they need positive runs. Defensively, they need to eliminate the big play. Always know where Brock Bowers is. I think Brock Bowers, the tight end from Georgia, is the best football player in the country. So locating and identifying him, not making sure you get tackles and that you're not giving up yards after contact. And, of course, the most vital part in every championship game, no big plays in the kicking game. Do not give up any kicks or punts for touchdowns. Don't get kicks blocked, and you're going to need your field goal kicker to come through and be good when he has the opportunity to make field goals.
So, am I crazy to think that the strategy that might allow TCU to win the ball game is also the same strategy that might get them blown out, and that is to challenge Georgia to make plays with receivers outside the numbers down the field? Like if Stetson hits them, you might lose by 40. Right. But maybe your path to winning is Stetson and his outside receivers being a little bit out of sync, a little off, a couple more 3-and-outs than maybe you expect to get. Because I don't think you can let Georgia dictate the game underneath and let Stetson just carve you up surgically and run the football. Don't you have to try to make them play uncomfortably? Like he's not the best outside the numbers deep ball thrower, as we've seen from some of his spray charts.
Well, I think that right now, if you go into the game tonight and you look at it, do you think that Stetson Bennett can beat you passing the football? If you're TCU, you got to think that your best chance at slowing them down is to make Stetson throw 30 to 40 passes and beat you. And that's if you can control the line of scrimmage and stop the run.
I was going to say that's what it comes down to for me. I mean, not that we're not Stetson Bennett bashers here, but if the game becomes one-dimensional for Georgia, I don't know if I trust him to win it by himself.
I think Stetson Bennett's a really good football player. I don't think he gets nearly the credit that he deserves for the role that he has played in Georgia's national championship season and in the season that Georgia has had. Everybody treats him like he's an also-ran, but you don't just get to play in 2 national championships and get an invite to the Heisman Trophy ceremony if you can't play football. Stetson Bennett has earned the right to be here.
There's no doubt he's a good player. I just think you have to try to roll the dice if you're TCU. You can't let Stetson hit a bunch of 10-yard passes in his comfort zone, a bunch to Bennett. beat you with screens, beat you with run game. Like if I'm Sonny Dykes, I want to go down swinging. If I lose to Stetson Bennett because he's bombing it over the top on me, fine. All right, tip your cap. The guy had a day. I don't want to let Georgia beat me and stay in Georgia's comfort zone doing so.
All right, we got another expert at the scene of the national championship game, and that is our own Josh Pate in LA at SoFi Stadium with his keys to the game.
Yeah, guys, National Championship Monday finally here. SoFi Stadium, open-air stadium. It may not look like it on TV, but it's a little chilly in here. Going to be red hot later. Probably the lamest thing I'll say all day. So forget about the metaphors. Let's get into the game. Georgia, they're not defending national champion because you can't take anything from them. They're not defending it, but they are going back-to-back, or at least going for it. And let's remember now, this was a program that up until last year had won 2 championships in the history of the program. They've been playing since like the 1400s there. They had 2 national championships, so this would be 2 in 24 months with Stetson Bennett at quarterback. I'm not going to bore you with he was a walk-on because everyone knows that at this point, but keys to tonight's game, and at least what I'll be watching, is how aggressive Georgia is. There's a really interesting pressure rate, both sides of the ball. Georgia 7th in the country in pressure rate allowed offensively. Conversely, TCU has not done a good job of getting after the quarterback. They are 100th in the country or thereabouts in pressure rate applied defensively. Now, what that means on paper is, there are going to be a lot of plays to be made against the TCU secondary. Okay, let's stop now and let's ask ourselves, is that how the Georgia coaching staff sees it? Is that how TCU's defense plays it as well? They could drop 8 all day and force you to dink and dunk, which I think Georgia would be more than happy to do. But I'll be really interesting. We've seen in games past, in years past, we've seen a sort of conservative approach. It worked when Georgia played Tennessee this year. That's because Tennessee could not dent the scoreboard. The best guess here on this side of the camera is TCU will be able to do that a little bit more tonight. So I think an aggressive approach probably puts Georgia in a much more advantageous situation than waiting for the game to come to them. To me, that plays right in TCU's wheelhouse. Another thing with Georgia is how many plays, how many ISO matchups can Max Duggan and TCU get on that secondary? And those defensive backs, in particular in man coverage, that's where you can exploit Georgia. I use that term loosely because exploiting them is not like exploiting normal defenses. You take what you can get. But tackling, that's the key for the Georgia secondary. Don't come in the game thinking you're about to shut someone down. You're not going to. You don't need to because you can score yourself. So those are 2 things I'm watching with Georgia. How would the upset happen, though? Everybody knows Georgia's favored. Everybody's looking at the line, 12, 13, 13.5, depending on where you look at any given point this week. So how would the upset happen? I came up with the number 4. Maybe it's 3. I came up with the number 4. And 4 is about the decibel level that they just crank the sound in the stadium up. But that's not the number I'm talking about. I'm talking about the combination of special teams plays and turnovers. If TCU can add those 2 stat categories up and it equals 4, I think at the very least we have a 4-quarter game. If not right, Horned Frogs pulling the outright upset. It's not impossible, okay? It's a very high variance game, a lot of different ways it can go. So if that's the starting point, then the second part of that is how do they hit explosive plays? Getting in the red zone is only part of the challenge against Georgia. Scoring in the red zone is very hard. The red zone numbers, I'm not going to bore you with those either, but they greatly favor the Bulldogs. And so, this field behind me tonight, it may look like it's a lot better, a lot more higher percentage scoring opportunity inside the 20s. TCU's just as likely to score between the 40s as they are inside the 20 because explosive plays, which Tennessee was not able to execute, and TCU hopefully can tonight for their sake. That's how you score against Georgia. Ohio State was able to do it last week. TCU, believe it or not, was not able to do that against Michigan. Sure enough, they scored enough points to win the game. They put over half 100 up, but that doesn't always tell the whole story. There were a lot of non-offensive points in that game. Michigan actually outdid TCU in explosive play rate. Plays of 20 yards or more beyond the line of scrimmage. They outdid them. Didn't matter that night. I think it will matter on this night here in Inglewood, California. The other thing is, with Georgia, a point spread this big does not mean guaranteed upset. It doesn't mean anything like that. But I'll tell you what it does mean. It means that the onus is on the underdog to accomplish some things that the favorite doesn't really have to do. The favorite, being Georgia, can probably afford to play B- football. And if they do that in all 3 phases, B- or better, I hate to put it like this, I don't really think it matters what TCU does. And that's not disrespecting TCU, which is a word we've heard a whole lot this week around that team clad in purple. But it's just the reality of the matter. It's the reality of depth. It's the reality of superior talent. We don't play these games by looking at star rankings. We don't play these games by looking at rosters. But the names on those rosters and the names those star rankings were next to, they do decide the game. And when you got plenty more of them like Georgia does, it doesn't mean you can't beat them. It just means you have to have some of the intangibles, some of the bobs, the bounce of ball plays. Those have to go your way. The other part of this that I kind of think maybe overlooked just because people have not let the reality of what it would be like for TCU to win this game set in yet is if they did win this game tonight, if TCU did win this game, I think all things considered, it is the biggest upset story in the history of college football. It's not the biggest upset point spread wise. Far from it. We had bigger upsets than this from a point spread perspective this year. But if you think in totality about what TCU has done, what they were last year, very fractured locker room, which has been talked about a lot this week, sub 500 team last year. They lose their head coach. They get a new one who doesn't even have to change addresses, just moves right across town. And you go not to the playoff, but you win a playoff game. We're coming off a year where people told you, hey, a G5 team can never make the playoff. Cincinnati did. They're telling you, no Cinderellas. No Cinderellas in college football. That end zone says TCU. And we're going to watch them play for a national championship tonight. If. We won't be saying if much longer. National championship from SoFi a few hours from now. Looking forward to it. Back to you.
B-? I'm sorry, is that what he said? Georgia can win playing B- football? Bud, what do you think about that?
I really think that's a tough ask. And with all due respect to Pate, like TCU, one of the things we love about them is how veteran they are, right? Like this is a team built partially through the transfer portal, built with a lot of vets. They don't play a lot of freshmen. They don't beat themselves a whole lot. Now they are beatable. That's kind of why I like Georgia. I think Georgia does have superior talent, but those veteran players don't make a whole lot of mistakes. And I'm curious as to how TCU plays this defensively because they really confused J.J. McCarthy. If you watch the picks he threw, the one was a total stare down. The other one, he added a little hitch to his drop, probably because he didn't fully trust what he was seeing because TCU does create all that defensive confusion. But in the back half of the Big 12 schedule, this TCU defense played a whole lot of man-to-man, much more than they did in the first half. And so I'm curious, like, will they man up Georgia? Will they try to play a bunch of zone? Will they try to get Stetson Bennett to throw them the game? And if you're Georgia, how many shot plays are you trying to dial up and telling Stetson, hey, 1-2, if it ain't there, go, take off, right? There's opportunities to run the ball with the quarterback on TCU's defense. I'm fascinated by that, but I think you're going to need better than B- to beat TCU, unless TCU, makes mistakes.
Well, I can tell you what, if Georgia plays B- football and TCU comes out on their A game, it's going to be a lot of sad Bulldogs in Georgia tonight. I can tell you that for sure. You coming into the national championship game, and although on paper you look dominant, sports has shown us time and time again, you can't overlook a team like this. TCU, if they come out and play well, they don't turn over the football, they make plays in the kicking game, they can put Georgia in an uncomfortable situation. Georgia needs to play their A game tonight. They don't need a B- performance. They're going to need an A to pass this test.
Guys, one part of this matchup that we haven't hit too much on yet is the explosive plays. Obviously, we know TCU is a top 10 offense in the country in just about every stat when it comes to explosives, but the real danger here is that on any given snap, it's not only a chance for TCU to move the chains, they can really score from any down and distance, and they have a whole list of players who can help them do so. Carl, how did the Dogs stop that?
Well, they have to stop it with their secondary, and they have to limit the plays in the running game by the way that they cover the box. They have to take care of the box first, and you have to make sure that you tackle people on first contact. Most explosive plays come from blown coverages and missed tackles. And so if they can limit that, that's going to put them in a good situation. But I'm going to tell you what, on the other side of this, Grace, the key for Georgia to have explosive plays is Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers had a quiet game a week ago against Ohio State. They're going to be looking early to get Bowers involved, and he is the key to me in terms of Georgia's offense and being able to make explosive plays.
Carl, I go back to listen to the Junkyard Dogcast, our great podcast for our Dogs 247 site, and I go back to the preseason. And the one guy they were talking up a lot who was tearing up Kirby Smart's defense in preseason camp was A.D. Mitchell. And he missed almost the entire year. But he is the one receiver on Georgia that I think has that like NFL ability. If he hits, like he could be a first-round pick if he keeps developing. If he gets matched up on some of these TCU safeties, you could have a run by, because like Ronnie Bell ran by these guys. Wilson ran by these guys. I love TCU's corners, but I don't necessarily love the ability for TCU safeties to carry verticals, right? You know, like if you can run your slots on these dudes. I'm interested to see how Georgia formations them. Defensively for Georgia, I think it's kind of a keep the ball in front of you and tackle well game. TCU is a pretty good screen team. You have to tackle that and make them execute in the red zone. That's why you recruit all that size, right? That's why Nick Saban says they don't let lightweights fight heavyweights. And that really matters in that compressed zone, just like you talked about. Like Georgia has been a tremendous red zone defense all year. I think it's a priority for Kirby Smart early on to not give up the explosive plays, to make TCU grind it and earn it. If they can, then you change in the final 40 minutes or whatever. But I'm coming out, if I'm Georgia, a little more conservative defensively, at least early on.
I just want to add, because one of you mentioned Georgia cannot miss a tackle. We all know that Quentin Johnston is a yak god, but I didn't realize how much so until I saw this stat on paper. Of his 1,064 receiving yards this season, 526 came after the catch, 294 came after contact. That's 49% of his production coming after the catch. So Georgia's got to be on it. But let's talk about the quarterbacks, Max Duggan and Stetson Bennett. Two grizzled veterans here, both playing their last college game, as Max Duggan has announced he'll be declaring for the NFL draft, and Stetson Bennett has run out of eligibility. A Hollywood story for him, but hey, his story isn't over yet. But Carl, we've talked about it a few times. You know, a lot of teams are recruiting these young five-star players who want to play right at time. But here, you look at the national title game, you got the vets out there. So are we seeing like a turning point here?
Years ago when I was a young coach, I had the opportunity to sit down and talk to the legendary Mike Leach. And he told me that the two most important qualities for a quarterback to have is leadership and accuracy. And these two guys have both. They have taken over their locker rooms, and the guys on their football teams trust them and they follow them. Stetson Bennett has held off a lot of competition during his time at the University of Georgia. Max Duggan is a guy who did not even enter this season as a starter. But from the time both of these guys have taken the helm, their teams have rallied around them. Second thing is they are extremely accurate throwing the football. They typically get the football to the right guy in the right place, and it makes them extremely dangerous. It keeps the chains moving. These two guys have been phenomenal leaders, phenomenal stories. And a lot of the 4- and 5-star young quarterbacks that are coming into college football today could learn a lot from these two guys in terms of their ability and the trust that they have earned in the locker room leading their football teams.
Last guy I talked to on the convention floor is a defensive coach who had faced Duggan, right? He said, look, I totally get why TCU started Shane Morris to start the year. Like, I think Shane Morris might be more talented as a thrower, but it is a pain in the backside. Not exact word he used, but real pain to play Max Duggan because he's a 24-year-old dude. He was a 4-sport kid in high school. He's really coming to his own. He has great confidence. He's hard to rattle. Is he the fastest reader of defenses? No. Does he have the best arm in the world? It's a good arm, but it's the balanced skill set and the fact that he just comes back to fight the next play. He has good mobility. He's hard to bring down. And, you know, Stetson Bennett, we talked on Cover 3. We had the entire Kent State staff on there, and they said the guy is just really smart as a player. He occasionally trusts his arm too much and will throw you a ball that you kind of surprises that he actually takes those chances. But, you know, Stetson does a really good job typically of IDing where to go with the football. And sometimes, I mean, he'll probably be like a 6th or 7th round pick. Sometimes he trusts his arm enough to act like he's a 1st round pick. I think if you're Kirby Smart, you go back to that halftime interview, that little halftime talk he gave to Stetson last week, and hey, look, we have enough talent on this ball team. do not throw this game away. Be sure, if not, take off and run it.
We've seen both of these guys absolutely put their body on the line, just two gritty players. I don't know, honestly, after the Big 12 title game, how Max Duggan was able to physically walk off that field. But I got a question for you guys. Could this game come down to which quarterback plays better in the fourth quarter?
It absolutely could come down to who makes the best decisions. And I don't even think it's always about who makes the biggest throws. It's about who doesn't make the mistake, that one critical error that costs your football team, being a pick, taking a sack that takes you out of field goal range, which is something that you see a lot of quarterbacks do. Whoever doesn't make that critical mistake at the end is going to be the guy that puts his team in the best position to win.
Totally agree. And the guy that plays within himself, I do like some of the secondary options that Stetson Bennett has to throw to here. So Bowers obviously is a primary, but he's kind of an interior option that they do flex him out some. I'm interested to see what they do with some of their 12 personnel with some of their screen game. And Bennett is a really good screen game guy. And there is an art to throw in screens well, as I'm sure Carl can tell you about. But also, like, Kenny McIntosh was one of the best pass-catching backs in the country coming out of the state of Florida. I think they'll probably get him involved in the passing game tonight. You know, Duggan is a little higher risk with some of his passes, a lot of balls to the outside. I'm curious how well he can drive the football against Georgia and how many chances Georgia will let him take. But it certainly could come down to the quarterbacks here in the fourth quarter.
Guys, let's predict some newspaper headlines for tomorrow. I don't know if anyone still reads the newspaper. I personally like a nice hard copy in my hand. I guess I'm old school that way. But let's set it up like this, bud. If blank wins, it's because, what's that headline say?
Georgia wins due to TCU not being able to get any pressure on Stetson Bennett.
Okay.
If TCU wins, it's going to be because Max Duggan played like the best player in college football tonight. And the headline tomorrow reads, "Down goes Frazier. Down goes Frazier."
I'm excited. All right, I'm gonna go find that headline, print it out, and we're gonna film you running around with that one. Okay, a couple injuries though to keep an eye on before kickoff, as we're about 2 hours away now. Georgia tight end Darnell Washington, obviously a huge piece in that two tight end offense. He's dealing with a soft tissue injury in his foot after a teammate stepped on him. Reports now are saying that he might not be used as a target, which is a big deal because he had 41 targets this season, but they will use him as a run blocker, which is pretty good because Washington is graded as the second best run blocker on the team per PFF. But Bud, just on Darnell Washington, how big is his impact for Georgia?
It's absolutely huge, right? This is something I think Michigan wanted to do, and they had some tight ends get hurt early in that ball game. But the ability to play 12 personnel from a blocking standpoint, it creates the extra gap. It widens the surface. The whole goal of teams when they play TCU is to get them out of that 3-3 stack, right? You want to get those backers off of the butts of those down linemen so you can get to them with better angles to block them. If Washington is actually healthy enough to play, I think it's a major key in this game and something that probably will bother TCU's defense from a run defense and from a screen defense standpoint. Even if he doesn't catch any balls, having him out there really messes with the defense because then you have to figure out, like, do we want to play base personnel here? And TCU's base, obviously, is at 3-3-5. Or do you need to go more kind of lighter nickel because he is mobile enough to play? And you have to kind of treat Bowers as a receiver. Like, if you watch what Missouri did to them, they kind of treated Bowers as a receiver and played nickel and bracketed him there on the inside, made Georgia force the ball to the outside, and Bennett struggled with that a little bit there. Washington, if he's healthy enough just to be a good screen game guy and a good run blocker, that's huge for Georgia in this ballgame. It really changes how TCU has to defend them.
The next injury we're keeping an eye on is TCU running back Kendre Miller, who is questionable with a knee injury, but reports on his playing status are a little bit more negative. He's had 224 rush attempts this season, which is 43% of the team total. Obviously, against Michigan, we saw Amari DiMercato with his coming out game. Carl, how does this impact TCU if RB number one can't go?
Kendre Miller has been a huge factor for TCU all season at the running back position, but I'm going to tell you what. as we saw in the semifinal game against Michigan, this is an opportunity for somebody to step up and make a name for themselves. You're playing college football. You're on scholarship. You have the opportunity here of a lifetime. They're going to put the ball in your hands. Make sure you make an impact for your team tonight, and don't be the reason that a big play doesn't get made.
All right. Well, we've reached the end of it, so let's do the most important thing, and that is making picks. Bud, who you got tonight?
I'm going to go Georgia 40-21 over TCU. I think Georgia gets out early and then just kind of slow cookers them, just boa constrictor.
So you got Georgia covering. What about the points total? It should be last time I checked, it was at 63.
Yeah, I would lean under here. If you think Georgia wins and you don't think it's some kind of comeback from Georgia, you probably lean under, which I do slightly. Probably a good live betting game too, especially if Georgia scores early and often. You got to think this thing will quickly head to the under because of how Kirby Smart typically plays with a lead.
People are going to think I'm crazy. I know that my DMs and my text messages are going to explode when people see this, but I'm going to go here. TCU 47, Georgia 44.
All right. Wow. Well, they got one of the best kickers in the country, so they'll be able to pull it out if it's a shootout down to the last seconds. I'm going Georgia straight up, but TCU to cover. So.
You can get 4-1 on this game to have more than 78 points out there. So,
wow,
that could be interesting.
Okay.
Little shootout, little rewarding shootout.
My man.
All right. Well, Bud, we appreciate you calling us in and joining us on this show. Thank you to Carl for flying in as well. And thank you to all of you for watching us on this first ever episode of College Football Today. We will be back tomorrow recapping the national championship game and some coaching carousel headlines as well. That'll be at 1 o'clock Eastern time. For Carl, Bud, I'm Grace Remington. We'll see you soon.